Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I'd like to call to order the Portsmouth Port and Industrial Commission meeting for Tuesday, April 25th, 2023. Call, please.
So good morning, Chair, and thank you to everybody for your attendance this morning. Begin with reading the roll. Mr. Peterman. Here. Ms. McSwain.
Present.
Ms. Rogers Garner is absent. Mr. Foster. Here. Jackson is absent. Ms. Allen.
Present.
Here we have a quorum.
Thank you. You have been sent the minutes from the February 28th regular meeting. We are in need of a motion and a second for approval of those minutes.
I move that the ministry accept it as written.
May second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Peterman.
Yes.
Ms. McSwain.
Yes.
Mr. Foster.
Yes.
And Ms. Allen.
Yes.
Here, the item is adopted by a vote of 4-0.
Thank you. Moving on to our Port of Virginia update. Good morning, Chris. How are you?
Oh, doing well. Thank you, Ms. Allen. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Well, I will just take my remarks to the point. I know we have a pretty full agenda. I'm excited to hear one of our key stakeholders. I know we've got a presentation by Will to do from the VMA, so real excited that Will's here with us this morning. But at the Port Authority, just to give you a quick update, March was a month where we saw volumes, I would say, sort of level out. You know, we all are cognizant of the headlines and see what's going on in the economy. You know, our volumes sort of fell to about 250,000 TEUs, which looking back over the past 2 years was obviously off the mark slightly as we've been experiencing record growth. But I think what for me really stands out is when we looked at our 2019 numbers, so pre-pandemic, over the 2023 figures, we have grown about 40,000 TEUs in the month of March, which is a big deal because March 1 is typically a busy month for freight. And it's good to see that we've got some real, what we call captured freight or sticky growth, where this is new volume, sort of decoupled from the craziness of the pandemic and all of the things that went wrong with the supply chain. I think we've begun to see some normalization and leveling out. We've also really seen an uptick in export loads, and that people, you know, many times don't realize how critical export volumes are to the port, and more importantly, loaded exports. And so we actually saw a continued growth in that segment of the business, which again is very favorable. Secondly, we've also continued to maintain, especially at VIG here in Portsmouth, Virginia National Gateway, Portsmouth, you know, turn times well below what is considered industry average. So we kind of say, you know, industry average for a truck to come in and out of a terminal, it's about an hour. And we're always shooting to be under a 60-minute turn time. For the month of March, we averaged a 35-minute turn time, which is terrific for a number of reasons. I mean, one, of course, you know, it's good for the trucker, but more importantly, that's them more opportunities to have productive time spent in the cab of their truck, right? So they're limited on their day and the amount of hours they can be on the road. And so the more efficient we are, the more frequency they can call on the port to pick up freight, netting them more business. And so really proud of what the operations team is doing and the technology we've implemented to sort of maintain for now many months what is considered best in class service for our trucking community up and down the coastline. So that's something Virginia, and especially there at VIG, really stands out. And then finally, I just, as many of us know and see daily, construction at Portsmouth Marine Terminal continues to go very well. And you can see the different piles of aggregate amongst the terminal, and what's going on there is to support the Dominion Energy CVOW project, which is the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project. That's a project of 176 wind turbines, which is going to begin construction here on May 1st of 2024. And that's when Dominion Energy will begin to install the subsea element, which is called a monopile, out there 27 miles off the coast of Virginia. For us, milestone perspective, we're about almost 30% complete on the enhancements, improvements necessary to handle this type of cargo, because these components are very heavy. Not only are they large and very unique dimensions, stuff that no port in the US is really capable, but the weights are really what the big factor. And so, we've been in a process of bolstering the berth and replacing large sections of the berth to enable us to handle these large weights, as well as building up the terminal itself so we can spread these large weights. I can tell you, we're targeting, I would say, late summer, early fall arrival of some of the first components. So it's exciting time. And I don't know if Brian is going to make remarks or not, but we can tell you because Brian and I happened to be in Baltimore about a month ago at a very significant, well-attended offshore wind conference. And what Virginia is doing here in Portsmouth is getting recognition throughout the world, because there's no other terminal like what's being built there at PMT. And so we will see freight to support the Seaval project arriving again, probably August, September. And there forward, it's going to be years of activity supporting the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project, and obviously many, many years to come of opportunities between Dominion Energy and, of course, the other project being Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy there at PMT. So really excited. It's good to see the construction, and I think it'll be more exciting to see the product start arriving, because I don't think any of us, dimensionally, we can give you the dimensions, but until you see it, is really believing how large these components are going to be, and just the amount of activity is going to be induced there at Portsmouth Marine Terminal moving forward. With that, I'll conclude my remarks, but happy to answer any questions from the commission.
I see you have a big orange ship parked down there. Is that something you're going to continue to do, or is it part of the construction?
Good question, sir. So that is actually part of we call it the term lay berth. And so Talton Marine is laying that vessel up. Grimaldi is the owner of that vessel, and they're going through a reflagging process. And it'll become part of the MARAD, which is sort of a ready reserve fleet. So that will stay there for a while, and then we'll cycle out other MARAD vessels to sort of lay up and do some, crew changing and just some, internal workings improvements to the vessels on that section. We refer to that still as the sea land berth. That's about 950-foot length. It's also somewhat decoupled or removed from the 3,000-foot berth, which will be focused primarily on supporting the offshore wind staging.
So you'll continue to berth ships there in the future?
Yes. Sort of transactional terminal type business, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you so much. I neglected to go through after the roll call, the intro.
That's okay. Well,
Okay, thank
that
you.
is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next up, we have did you want to comment on?
No, okay.
Thank you. Next, we have our Burton's Point Road update. Brian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Want to share just a couple of quick updates on Burton's Point Road. The two TPIC-owned properties at 3920, 3930 Burton's Point, you're familiar with. We've been working based on your direction at your February meeting to do a couple of things here. The first is to look to get a proposal for updating the wetlands survey for the wooded track there at 3930. So we're going to be looking to do that with the firm that completed the first study that was done a number of years ago. And then the second is we are also working with a civil engineer to obtain a proposal for some conceptual layouts. And we plan to bring that back to you in May, both of those items, so you can review the proposal and pricing before we proceed. So wanted to share that with you. We're making some progress on that end, but perhaps a more exciting and noteworthy update is Burton's Point Road. As of last week is moving to a construction phase here with some roadway improvements. And this has been a long time coming for the businesses along Burton's Point Road, for the shipyard and PBIC as well. And the project actually started on April 17th. We expect the construction to run through the end of the year. I did provide at your place at the table, there's a flyer that has some information on the project. But just to kind of recap, what it will include is a complete roadway installation on what is now essentially a gravel road, to include drainage improvements as well as pedestrian access points, sidewalks, and some updated and upgraded lighting improvements. So really excited to have this underway. Want to thank the city attorney's office for their assistance in taking care of some legal matters that had to be resolved for this to happen. But this will put the PPIC in a great position as it relates to marketing the property, ensuring that there's access to the land that you have on Burns Point Road. So we will certainly give you updates as the project moves forward. But this is a great project for the entire Burns Point community. So we'll keep you posted on that as it moves.
Is this being totally funded by the city or is it PPIC involved in the funding of that?
This is a city improvement project, so there's no PPIC participation from that cost standpoint.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? And we move on to our Port Host Community Grant Program. Brian?
So you have at your table a press release from the governor's office, which is recognizing the award of the FY23 Port Host Community Revitalization Fund Grant Awards of $1.5 million. Portsmouth was successful in receiving its $415,000 grant request. So that is official now. We have been waiting on that for some time. And again, this is to support the Crofton Industries project at 16 Harper Avenue, where they're going to be reconstructing the waterfront bulkhead to assist in their operations from a construction, marine construction standpoint. They will be looking to start as soon as we can get them under contract, and that is really the next step, is working through a performance agreement with the state of Virginia and Crofton to allow for them to move forward. So we will keep you posted on that. There will be something for you to sign, Madam Chair, and we'll be working on that over the next 60 days to make that happen. So really excited. You can see the historical list here of awards received to date. We've really worked to utilize this pot of funds that the state has provided. And I think we've had some really great projects that have benefited from the program, which ultimately result in benefit to the city of Portsmouth through improved real estate and generated revenues. So, happy to answer any questions, but this is a great win for them.
Any questions? Hearing none, thank you so much. We're now on to our new business.
If I could just take a quick moment before we get to our presentation and guest today, I'd like to introduce a new team member to the Port Industrial Commission. Ms. Nala Saleh has joined our office. This is the third week now, I want to say. But Nala is a Hampton Roads resident who was formerly with the Hampton Roads Workforce Council, and she has made the move over to Portsmouth, and she will be leading our Portsmouth at Work Workforce Development Initiative as our manager of workforce development. So very excited to have her on board. She brings a lot of experience from the region and will be assisting our programs and our residents with their workforce needs. So excited to have her on.
Wonderful, welcome.
Thank you. Very thankful.
Okay, we have our Virginia Maritime Association presentation.
Yes, we are fortunate to have a guest here this morning, Mr. Will Fadu, who is the Vice President of Industry and Government Affairs with the Virginia Maritime Association. Will and his team are a great partner for Portsmouth and the region. Will and David there at VMA. We work very closely together. Chris had mentioned a recent offshore wind conference that we were attending in Baltimore. Will was there as well, representing the Hampton Roads region as part of the team. And I had asked Will if he'd be willing to come in and brief you all on the Virginia Maritime Association, so that you were aware of them and what they do on behalf of the maritime and port industries in Hampton Roads and really the state of Virginia. So Will was gracious enough to accept the invitation and come over this morning to present to you all. So with that, Will, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. Madam Chair and Commissioners, thank you so much for having me here. I'm Will Padu. I'm the Vice President of Industry and Government Affairs of the Virginia Maritime Association. And what I really wanted to do is just kind of provide the Commission a good overview of who we are and what we do statewide, but also with Portsmouth. I do like to start out by saying I'm a child of Portsmouth. Spent my entire childhood here between Turnpike Road and then Maryland Avenue. I spent a lot of time down in the Port Norfolk area looking at what is now big in the Coast Guard base. After ODU, I joined the Coast Guard, so spent some time around the country doing what the Coast Guard does, and we're very happy to have them here in Portsmouth.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you so much. And I then got involved in the commercial maritime industry, and here I am today. So another interesting thing to really think about. So 103-year-old trade association, over 450 member companies in the maritime space, with over 28 of those actually being in Portsmouth. So when you think about companies such as Port Rail Crane or Crofton, some of these other companies in the maritime space, they're members of our association as well as our great partners at the Port Authority as well. In order to allow us to do what we do, which is to protect, promote, and encourage commerce through Virginia's ports. So you all are very familiar with that image there, and really just kind of taking some time to talk about everything across the state today. One of the things I want to point out, and if you don't mind, I'll stand up. It'll just make it a little easier. So a lot of times when people hear maritime, they immediately think water. They think of Hampton Roads. They might think that the maritime industry in Virginia is just a Hampton Roads thing. But in reality, for us, it is statewide, and we have members across the entire state, from Southwest Virginia, Northern Virginia, the Valley, et cetera, and of course here in Hampton Roads. Because when you think about the movement of cargo, there's an importer, an exporter, and then there's everybody who makes that work, to include rail, trucking, warehousing, terminals, and ship operators. So when we talk about the maritime industry, it is for us truly statewide. Some great stats, and I think you know some of these. Second largest on the East Coast by tonnage and third largest by container volume, and growing, right, Chris? 55 different marine terminals. And that's something that a lot of people don't know, that between Richmond and the North Carolina border, we have about 55 different commercial waterfront facilities. We're the largest coal exporter in the United States, with 40% of the nation's coal being exported through our 3 terminals. Largest shipbuilding and ship repair complex in the U.S., largest Navy base, and actively dredging to 55 feet. So we have a fantastic story to tell. I'm not going to spend any time talking about this because you know this quite well, our container industry. But something I do want to talk about a little bit is what you may not know is the rest of the maritime industry here in the Commonwealth. So like I mentioned, about 55 marine terminals here, 50 of those being privately held and not involved in container operations. So moving everything from bulk goods, both liquid bulk and dry bulk. When you think of products like grain or rock for construction, when you think about things like traditional oil and gas or renewable exports such as wood pellets, break bulk cargo, etc. This is a shot of a southern branch, which shows a chemical carrier going down the river. And Virginia has multiple different facilities and ship repair and building complexes to serve our greater maritime industry. This is just a visual representation showing, Richmond all the way down to Newport News, a good snapshot of all the different terminals we have. And then here specifically just shows the southern branch of the Elizabeth River. And what I really like to think about or tell the story about our port is we have on average over the last few years about 2,300 vessel calls a year, and that's deep draft traffic, and that does not include the thousands of vessel calls or barge traffic that we have coming in and out. I do want to highlight one thing that we're working on with the city of Chesapeake right now, just as an example of some collaborative work that we could do. Chesapeake right now is undertaking a industrial waterfront study where they're taking a really hard look on the southern branch, which does border 3 cities, to really figure out what they have available to them and trying to figure out best use. When you think about commercial use, coastal resiliency, et cetera. We're also in the middle of working on the first steps of dredging the southern branch of the Elizabeth River, thanks to fantastic partners in Congress and in Senate. We have recently been rewarded $100,000 to start some of the administrative, preliminary engineering and design work for the Army Corps Norfolk District. And recently, Congressman Scott and Senator Warner both put in $4 million for next year to keep the next step of this preliminary engineering and design work. So this benefits the city of Portsmouth as well, because this stretch of the river does extend from Lambert's Point, the coal terminal, all the way down. I love this slide because it talks about everything that we have going on in our port. So if you see the red and yellow, those are AIS or vessel tracks, and that's a heat map that shows typically how vessels are coming in and out of our port. You see the shape off to the right there, that is the CVAL project. And then these magenta lines, which really highlight different DoD training areas, et cetera. And one of the things, so I've worked in a lot of ports around the United States, and one of the things I love is that we have so many things that are best in class here that other ports would be lucky just to have one of, whether it's a world-class commercial port or Navy installation, shipbuilding complex, or an offshore wind project. And we have all of those. So that creates some fantastic opportunities, a little bit of a challenge when you think about making sure that we have room to do everything we need to do in a thoughtful manner on behalf of the greater Commonwealth. You know about dredging. I know Chris and his team keeps everybody up to speed there. But like I said, the newest effort right now is now working on the southern branch and Elizabeth River to take those to greater depths so we can move more goods through our ports. And I'll touch a little bit on offshore wind. These are the 2 turbines that are out there right now spinning. And Chris and his team have done a fantastic job really marketing what I call the jewel of the East Coast when you think of an offshore wind construction and laydown yard. So I'm not going to spend too much time there. And you may have heard about what's happening right across the water with Lambert's Point, now Fairwinds Landing, $100 million of investment to go into a multi-purpose facility that will also benefit offshore wind. So we're currently working with Fairwinds as well. They're also members of ours and the greater Fairlead team on securing more funds through federal grants to really turn this into another world-class facility. And we do think about the potential that we then have in our port with Portsmouth Marine Terminal and then Fairwinds Landing literally right across the way from each other, and what we can do from both a construction standpoint for offshore wind, but also long-term O&M to service these projects for 20 to 30 years. But this slide is very important to the Commonwealth. And what this represents all in one, I'll talk about each one. So first you see these green lines and the little pink shape there. So this represents work that we've done with the Coast Guard for the last several years on a port access route study and ensuring that we have safety fairways off our coast for vessels to come in and out of our port. So then you see the CVAL project, which is right there in the middle, the blue, the Kitty Hawk Wind project down at the bottom. And then these blue and orange hash areas represent what will be wind energy lease areas for Q1 2024 on potential new offshore wind development right off our coast. And these 3 blue lines you see coming across the screen also represent multiple transatlantic telecom cables that are also being planned to come ashore as well. So lots of amazing things that we have going on all at one time, where we have to ensure that we have vessels that can come in and out of our fantastic port infrastructure, offshore wind being developed, and then also new opportunities like transatlantic telecom, all working together. And it really does take a team. So I'm proud of my team and our stakeholders as we work together on deconflicting these spaces. The other thing that's not shown there is all the DoD training areas, which if you were to ask the Navy where their training areas are, they will tell you all of it, right? So we continue to work with them as well to make sure that everyone has room to grow in the Commonwealth, because 1 of every $10 in the Commonwealth of Virginia is tied to the maritime sector. That's why it's so important for us. So even in the context of offshore wind, when we think about supporting offshore wind, which we have for over a decade, for us, it's also making sure that we support offshore wind, but without hindering any of our commercial port operations, DoD operations, et cetera.
Can I ask a question? Is this all chiseled in stone or is this, okayed by, who signed this off?
Sure, great question. So the fairways that I was mentioning, the green, that's all proposed right now by the U.S. Coast Guard. And so they're working on that portion with commercial stakeholder input. So the Virginia pilots, myself, the Port Authority, ocean carriers, all involved in that effort. Simultaneously, the offshore wind work being done under the management of BOEM, also working with the stakeholder group. I'm also the chair of the Virginia Offshore Wind Development Authority, and Chris is my vice chair, operating under the Virginia Energy. So there's a lot of wrangling that goes on because, as you can imagine, and I'm sure you're not surprised, when the Coast Guard's doing their thing in a silo and BOEM is doing their thing in a silo, and DoD's floating around there saying all their training areas, it really takes some intentionality to break down those silos and make sure that everyone's working together and on the same page. So to answer your question, like I said, the fairways, they will be finalized this summer. Offshore wind, that's the latest iteration that's expected to go to bid Q1 of next year. So I don't foresee any changes to those shapes, but all that means is potential lease areas for companies to bid on. So I'll say probably the majority of that will not be constructed or bid on. It just shows some options.
Thank you.
So the facility that's being built at the port, what portion of the picture are they gonna populate?
Yeah, fantastic question. So right now, Dominion Energy has subcontracted a portion of PMT to work on the CVAL project, right? And then the other portion by Siemens Gamesa, they're the contractor for the nacelles and the blades right now. But if you were to ask them, they obviously want to do more business in order to drive further investment into that property. So really, it depends on how much Dominion Energy continues to develop as a developer. It depends on how much Siemens Gamesa, what contracts they win up and down the coast. We do believe that we can hit essentially South Jersey all the way to the Carolinas within a day's sail from our facilities. And we do believe we are the premier Central Atlantic area for building this offshore wind supply complex. So I think the market will sort some of that out, as well as whether or not Dominion wants to sublet any of their property as well.
And how many wind turbines go in that spot?
176 is what's in the permit right now. Technology is continuing to improve. So as the technology improves, the turbines get bigger, and that allows in some cases them to actually have a smaller footprint. All right, I just wanted to highlight a few other things non-offshore wind related that we have going on in our greater port. This was all last year too, so fantastic. Titan America, $37 million on the southern branch for expansion of imports as they import aggregate products such as cement and stone to support infrastructure development. Purdue Agribusiness, $60 million expansion for grain exports. That's one of the most successful grain export terminals on the East Coast. And then cruise ship. Last year was our absolute busiest season we've had to date with over 65 cruise ships. And look what that represents, over $23 million in revenue just by having these passengers walking around downtown Norfolk, coming to downtown Portsmouth, et cetera. And it's getting bigger. So the future is several major cruise ship lines looking to have a weekly service here out of the Half Moon Cruise Ship Terminal. So if you can imagine looking outside and seeing a cruise ship every week, year round. So we're very excited about that. And I hope you see between the great work that the Port Authority does on the container side and offshore wind and all these other things, you can see the diversity of our maritime cargo and everything we have going on in the region.
Does your 65 plus count the American Cruise Line folks with the smaller cruise ships that are docking in Portsmouth? Or is that just the big cruise lines over Half Moon?
I believe this is just the big cruise ship lines, but I'm not 100% on that. I'd just like to show this quick snapshot of all the different companies that are involved in the port industry. So I'll let you read just a few of those. You're familiar with many of them already, and what it takes to really run a maritime supply chain. And this is the rest of the list. And really what that highlights is the amount of companies in Portsmouth that are already involved in this space and the amount of opportunity for even more companies to become involved in our growing maritime economy here in the Commonwealth. I love showing this, just a few quick slides about all the different things in Virginia that are maritime related. So this represents products that we're either importing or exporting in Virginia, as well as a great snapshot. And this is just one from VEDP that shows all the different manufacturing and distribution centers in Virginia. And if you see a large concentration down there in the Hampton Roads area, lots of opportunities for the Hampton Roads region to continue to grow in this capacity so we can take advantage of our world-class port. And as we move these cargo gateways, if you will, into the heartland quarter of the United States. This is the slide I was mentioning before. So we're very proud of this, but this is why it matters. Like I said, $1 in every $10 tied to the GSP in Virginia, over $500,000 jobs in the Commonwealth that are tied to the greater maritime economy, to include shipbuilding, ship repair, commercial port, and the movement of goods. So again, the maritime industry in Virginia really matters on a grand scale. And how do we do this? I just kind of want to bring all this home of what we do at the association. So like I said, a lot of our work is on the advocacy side. So I handle all our state and federal government affairs, so from Richmond to Congress, as well as working on all our industry outreach and working with our member companies. But as we continue to, champion port competitiveness and education and awareness efforts, with great groups like this and others, to just kind of remind everybody what we have going on, as well as the work we do on the legislative front, working with policy and budget. Every year we have Port Day, where we go up to Richmond with about 80 of our members. And last year we had actually about 100 different visits in one day. We had 18 teams that went across and met with all our elected officials to talk about the amazing things that we're doing. A big focus for our last legislative session has been now on workforce, on continued site readiness and having more sites available for development. As well as, like I said, workforce. Every company right now is saying workforce is their biggest challenge, and how can we help address that? Working with partners like the Hampton Roads Workforce Council, et cetera, to ensure that all these growing companies have the labor that they need. And that's all I have. I will say big thanks to Brian, good friend of the association. The Portsmouth Economic Development is a member of the association. So Brian and I typically see each other around at different events, as well as trips to different conferences as we talk about all the great things that's happening, not only in the Commonwealth, but in Portsmouth as well. So thank you for giving me a few minutes, unless there's any questions.
Anyone, any questions?
I just have one, aside from Brian.
Hold on, Mr. Buchanan.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You talked about workforce, and a lot of employers talking about how it's a big deal and you work with this area's workforce. Are they also willing to invest in workforce and put in money to train the residents or people in the Hampton Roads area in order to get them into the workforce?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think that the first thing we're actually working on, the short answer is yes, but it's really wrangling the resources that we already have. Like if you look around Hampton Roads right now, there is a number of training institutions that have training, they have capacity. In a lot of cases, they're willing to pay for training. They just need to, put butts in seats, for lack of a better term, right? But they're not able to find the bodies. It's no different with the shipyard across the water. Everybody is just trying to find anybody that's willing to be trained. And they're looking at, like I said, paid training, guaranteed job placement. And we're still struggling. So the first effort is really getting everyone on the same page. We are working with the Hampton Roads Workforce Council on a lot of their maritime initiatives, because they just received some grant funding to really drive a concentrated effort of placing both, when you think of high school students, college students, wherever, into the maritime space in these different training capacity. The big challenge that we have, and you can all appreciate, is unless you grow up on the water, or maybe your mom, your dad, your uncle, whomever, works in the maritime industry, it's not something you really know about. I mean, like I grew up, like I said, in Portsmouth, and part of how I even knew what was going on is because I lived right there in Port Norfolk and I saw the ships, I saw the Coast Guard base, and all that even did was say, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what that's all about. So working on a lot more awareness initiatives in the K-12 space. So Gary Bahina, for example, I think you know him. He works a lot with our association, getting the message earlier, not just in high school, because in some cases it's too late, but middle school, elementary school, tours, workshops. Here's the type of things that are available to you. These are the jobs. This is the income you can have, the lifestyle you can have, and getting that in their thought pattern earlier on. So it's a very long answer. I'm sorry.
Mr. Peterman? Oh,
No, in fact, you basically answered my question too, because my question was, what could the PPIC be doing for you that Brian isn't already?
Yeah, great question, right? So, and thank you for setting me up. So one of the things that I think that the PPIC could do is just continue to collaborate with the Maritime Association, because our strength is we're a statewide organization, and the fact that we represent, all the different localities, all the different members in the public and private space. And so information sharing, getting involved in what we're doing, things like, thankfully, you allowed me to come today and share with you just that general awareness so we can brainstorm, knowing that, like Brian and the economic development team and the PPIC, obviously your vested interest is Portsmouth, right? But working with the bigger picture too, so we can, share resources and information.
Okay, thank you.
Nala, did you have an additional?
I was just gonna say that, what they're trying to do next school year is having a World of Wonder, like career fair, not really, it's like inclusion for all of middle schools in the Hampton Roads area. Are a lot of companies part of that right now? If not,
I'm not sure, because that's the first I've heard of it, so
Okay.
love to collaborate on that.
I'll get your information to possibly
Sure.
get you guys at the event.
Thank you.
So I'll just make a comment. The World of Works event, I think last year was held in Chesapeake,
Yeah.
and the Hampton Roads Workforce Council was sort of the catalyst, drive that. The Port Authority did participate, and we obviously echo the need to get more exposure and understanding to the students, because it is, some aha, like when they realize what's going on the waterfront. And so we definitely are supporters of those type of events, and excited to hear they're going to do regional. Why? Because nature of our community, it's sort of sometimes decoupled, and certain communities are taking certain approaches, but we want to be part of that. And so if you all at PBIC hear of something, please feel free to share that with me, because that's obviously something that sometimes there's so much going on, we just don't hear about it. And so I want to be part of that as well, and that messaging with the VMA, getting out the maritime jobs.
Councilman, do you have any questions?
I have a lot of questions. First a comment. So on workforce, I had a chance to go visit New Horizons over on the peninsula yesterday. I don't know how many of you know about New Horizons. I had heard of New Horizons, but didn't know anything about it. So it's a CTE high school, regional CTE high school on the peninsula. Collaboratively funded by Hampton, Newport News, York County, Williamsburg, but basically everybody over on the peninsula. 1,300 high school students, 1,100 adult students across 23 CTE programs. I mention it because we were toured by the executive director, and he shared that he's currently in discussions with the Navy, and there's interest in standing up a maritime CTE campus on the south side. So I conveyed that Portsmouth is interested in working with him and them. Spoke to the mayor and suggested offering a spot in our innovation district as a potential location, something that kind of fits the model that I think we have in mind for the innovation district. So anyway, seeds are planted. Now we have to sprinkle on some manure and some water and see how things go. Ron, you asked about, what can we do to help? I'd be interested to know how you guys think we're doing in finding room for trucks and containers and chassis, because my sense is we're in react mode. And I say that because just in the short time that I've been on city council, we've entertained rezoning to accommodate chassis storage, truck and container storage. And not, maybe it was the last meeting we talked about Burton's Point as a potential location for more truck and chassis and container storage. And the challenge, of course, is how do you get to and from without driving trucks and chassis through neighborhoods? And so it seems to me that one of the things that we could do collaboratively is understand how you guys see the truck and chassis and container storage outside the port. Are we providing enough? If we're not, and my sense is we're not, because otherwise we wouldn't see steady traffic to the planning commission to take any empty land in Portsmouth and turn it into truck and chassis and container storage. But figuring out proactively, what's the plan? What are the routes? We consistently get folks at city council talking about somebody's parking a truck or a tractor in my neighborhood and I can't see around them for my kids to get on the school bus. And so instead of having it become a problem, I think there is some work that we collectively could do with you guys to figure out how do we accommodate this, because we want to be accommodating. We want the truck and chassis and container traffic to come through Portsmouth to and from the port. And we can either do it the way we're doing it, which is pissing people off, or we can kind of get out in front of it and work with you to figure out what makes sense to use either the land or the routing through the city to accommodate your needs and do it in a friendly way that accommodates the needs of my neighbors.
What are your thoughts on that, gentlemen?
Well, so yes, I think the answer is yes, we'd like to be part of that conversation. I think there are opportunities for enhancement. I know, every time I come before the commission, it's not a broken record, but I think it's a good thing that there's obviously a lot of good news. We've got the volume growth. We've seen the investments in Portsmouth. We see the investments in NIT. We see the investments in the harbor, and then the volume that comes from that, those improvements and investments. And so the answer is yes. I think there is very much a conversation needed, and we want to be an active participant, because as these investments really become bearing fruit, the volume is going to continue to grow. And I think that's a great thing. I think we recognize the value. We'll put up the slide that shows the economic impact statewide. But then when you look here in the city of Portsmouth and the number of citizens that are directly tied to this industry, it is significant. And so by all means, we would very much appreciate the opportunity and be a part of that discussion. And I think there are a win-win. I understand the neighbors' concerns and complaints. I think we all can share that as citizens and understand the disliking of non-conforming truck parking. And so, but that's sometimes it's the nature of there not being a space for the truck to go. And so I do think we can find a win-win for the community and then the industry so that we can continue to grow this thing, because it's on a trajectory of growth. And I think Portsmouth is going to be a tremendous benefactor of this continued growth, maritime related.
And I think that's a message also that we've been taking to the General Assembly of realizing that, and Chris mentioned it, we have hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone into dredging. We have hundreds of millions of dollars into terminal development, terminal optimization to improve the supply chain. And we have to remind ourselves that it is that chain. So as volume is being added, like Chris said, we have to continue to add volume and capacity down the line. So through things like container yards, chassis yards, et cetera. Otherwise, all those amazing investments and work will just be, the bottleneck will just be moved. And even, PMTs, we've found a fantastic way to repurpose that and make additional revenue for the state and support offshore wind. But everyone knows, I mean, that pretty much has taken up, what was valuable container storage space. So how do we continue to move and then drive, really our elected officials at the city level and also, the General Assembly, et cetera, to say we need more funding for more sites, for more development, to keep the fluidity moving down the chain. Otherwise, it kind of lessens the investments we made in everything else.
Yeah. So you made an important point, the choke point. If you continue to grow the way we hope you can continue to grow, may eventually become the streets of Port Norfolk, your old neighborhood. Because there ain't enough streets there to accommodate all of the back and forth traffic in and out of the container storage on Pinners Point and whatnot. So kind of figuring out how do we not shoot behind the duck like we kind of feels like we have been reacting to your growth instead of getting out in front of it and understanding what do you predict and what therefore should we be trying to get ahead of.
I do have a question for you, Councilman. You mentioned the potential training center. Is Portsmouth Public Schools at the table for those discussions as well?
Not yet. So I was just there yesterday. Interestingly, Dr. Bracey's wife is the executive assistant to the executive director at New Horizons. So I'm sure there are discussions around the dinner table about New Horizons and what's going on, but we surely need to get PPS engaged in the discussions because the school board has their own ideas about how to grow career and technical education. And one of the discussions that we had with Casey Roberts, the New Horizons executive director, recognizing that he collaborates with, I think it's 6 different school systems. How do you do that and not foster competition between CTE, say in Hampton Public Schools and the CTE that you're doing? And his model is he wants to be the Harvard of CTE. So the kids go a certain distance inside Hampton Public Schools, let's say, and then elect to come to New Horizons. And at New Horizons, they go kind of across the finish line to get certificates that allow them to immediately get hired and go to work. Where in high school, in the high school CTE, the individual high school CTE programs, they don't necessarily cross the finish line to get a certificate to go to work. They pick up some skills and then kind of got to go figure out how to get a job using what they have learned.
When I served on the school board, I did tour New Horizons. There are a couple of courses at Portsmouth Public Schools that you can potentially get your certificate after you finish those courses. But New Horizons was very impressive when I went to see it. It's a very interesting concept of how it's pulled together. I just wanted to kind of make sure that I agree with the maritime concept of placing that and that will bring more people here to actually utilize that. I just wanted to make sure that publicly that I'm asking a question about making sure PPS is at the table for those discussions as well.
Well, and you brought up the challenge of finding kids to put in the seats.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also a challenge that they face.
Yeah.
They managed to do it because what they're doing is complementary to what's going on in the schools. But it's still a challenge to find kids that want to be welders and pipe fitters and ship fitters and shipboard electricians, even though it's clear that that the jobs are out there. The jobs are, people are in demand. I attended the Navy Yard hiring fair at the Renaissance on Saturday. Nice turnout, but they're continuing to schedule monthly hiring fairs because they can't get enough people to fill the jobs that they have available.
Well, especially because it's so much more than just, the shipbuilding side. And I think that's part of the image here when we talk about trades, schools and maritime. Everyone automatically assumes shipbuilding, ship repair because of the great work that we do here. But it's also now the need for trucking, for warehousing and distribution,
Logistics.
and telling the story that, this isn't a low skill, low wage job. I mean, like warehousing right now in distribution centers, a lot of them are filled with pretty advanced robotics. They need all the same type of skills of, just traditional business services. And so, a young man, a young woman could now go and work in a warehouse or distribution center setting and be involved in some pretty cutting edge stuff. It's just telling that story,
Yeah.
And what that looks like for their future as well.
Well, and the port is the poster child for, it used to be backbreaking work. Now the robots do the backbreaking work, and you need really smart people to keep the robots from bumping into each other while they're doing their backbreaking work.
Okay. Any further discussion before we move on? Thank you so
Thank
much
you so much.
for the presentation. We're moving on to our FY 24 budget. Madam Treasurer.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
If you would look at the budget, in the packet that we received, you'll see, what we're proposing for the 2024 budget, excuse me. Mr. Donahue, he and I met on the 25th. It was 25th, what do we mean? No, we met on the 17th.
Last Monday.
Yes, we met on the 17th. And if you look at the first three columns, it tells you, the prior 3 years of what we actually spent out. And then the prior budget for 2022 is in the next column. The current budget for fiscal year 2023, you'll see that. And then fiscal 2024 proposed budget. If you look at the numbers, most of the numbers stay closely, the same. We did have, some recommendations for the 2024 budget. And if you go to, let me go to first the travel, go down to travel. It was 1,000 previously, but I suggested that we increased it to 2,000. That and also with the training as well, which would give the commissioners the opportunity to do maybe 2 or 3 trainings, or cover the travel for whoever would like to go to different training. And so just raised about $1,000. And then because of the, if you go down to contractual survey and appraisal, because of Burton's Point, we needed to put something there to cover the surveys that we're going to have done there. So our suggestion was the medium at 10,000. We start off there, and just keep in mind that any money that we do not use, it just stays in the account. It's not going anywhere. And if we need to add money, we can always go back and do that as well. Okay, and so basically, like I said, most of everything was pretty much close in numbers as far as the previous years. Those were 3 of the major increases. Did I miss anything, Simon?
Thank you, Ms. McSwain. I think you captured the majority of the items that we had reviewed and discussed. Just a couple of other things to quickly point out. Under your operating revenues at the top of your budget, you'll notice we do have a $415,000 Port Host grant coming in. That's the one that we just shared with you. We received an award on last week. So that is reflective of those resources coming in. Couple of your other operating expenses that are worth noting. Contractual other, which this current year we had allocated $20,000. We have to increase that based on the recommendation of the budget committee to $50,000 to cover the cost of those conceptual layouts for Burton's Point Road, as well as any wetlands surveys and updates that need to be performed. I don't expect to use that money in that full amount, but it is there to allow for us to move forward for that purpose. The other one item I did want to mention is business development. The committee, Ms. McSwain, Mr. Peterman, they did recommend increasing that to 15,000. It's currently at 9,000 this year. And that again covers things like marketing campaigns, sponsorships, participation in various organizations, including organizations like the BMA that Mr. Padu just presented to you on. So that would allow for you to sponsor events and so forth, which you have done over last year.
I think it's also worth mentioning the Star-Based Victory ad. I mean, I guess the question is, we just added a bunch of money, and I guess, how do we oversee that money?
Specifically the Starbase
Yes.
grant, that was something that was introduced last year to the board. You allocated $50,000. We have not actually spent any of that money this year. I believe Starbase has had some staffing changes and maybe has restructured just a little bit this year. So we have not provided them any financial assistance in the current year. But the consensus was to look at earmarking them again for next year, so that if there were any programs that required assistance or sponsorship, the PPIC would have the ability to do that. I think this kind of ties into the conversation we just had about engaging with our elementary and middle school age students, their curriculum, to really get them aware of the industries that we have here in Hampton Roads.
So I just wanted to highlight that because I think it's a real opportunity to do something.
Absolutely.
They asked us to wait, because we were trying to, contribute, but because of the changes that they are having, they asked us to just, hold on. So we wanted to make sure we had something there when they were ready.
So I think we'll need to revisit that with Starbase and the schools and figure out how we can support, what is their specific need and how do we use these funds to help that.
Starbase will be presenting their futures program at tonight's city council work session. Because I've asked the city manager to fund first year of the Starbase futures program. So, tune into the work session tonight, get a chance to see where Starbase is headed.
Okay, thank you.
And you good?
I think we've covered most everything. So just in terms of process, our plan is to, pending any comments or feedback, would be to work to finalize the budget with our finance department. There are some numbers here from prior years that we need to update based on actual costs and expenditures, but bring a final form budget back to you at your May meeting for adoption. So that's kind of the timeline that we're on. Certainly happy to have this as a continuing conversation. If you have any follow-ups, you can certainly send those to me, and I'll engage with the budget committee to get this in the final form for your meeting.
Thank you. And thank you to Mr. Peterman and Treasurer McSwain for participating on the budget committee for the FY24 budget. Moving forward to the Southgate Annex, the Shipyard Southgate, the Southgate Annex.
So it's a lot. So we wanted to bring for you, and this is back before you haven't had a conversation on this for some time, but this is a piece of property that is owned by the Navy. It is on Burton's Point Road. It's literally just across the street from your property, and is adjacent to a couple of our private industry stakeholders, Accurate Marine and Bain Brothers. And the Southgate property is approximately 16 acres. And we have had prior conversations with the Navy about this property potentially being surplus and available for some sort of adaptive reuse to accommodate industrial enterprises. So myself, staff, and Mr. Peterman last Thursday, following a military affairs committee meeting, met with the shipyard's planning liaison, Patrick Childs, I believe you met previously, and Captain Dasher, who oversees the operations there in the yard, and Councilman Hugel was in attendance as well. And we had a really good, frank discussion about the future for this property and what the Navy's needs were. And I think the takeaway, and I'm going to ask for Mr. Peterman and Councilman Hugel to join in here, is that the Navy's really still kind of assessing what its needs are for that property. This site serves multiple purposes. It serves as overflow parking. The carrier is in port at the yard. They also use it for storage. There's a potential for that storage and operation side to increase in the future as the shipyard is going to be undertaking some improvement projects. So the use of that property is kind of in flux right now. I think historically has probably been underutilized, but
More or less a junkyard right now.
that's one way of saying it. It has been, it has been that for a number of years that, there's things stored out there from decades ago. But the bottom line is there is a process that the Navy will have to work through to fully assess the property and its availability. There are some environmental concerns there. They have done some studies. I think we've agreed that they need to do a little bit more research on the environmental aspects and potential for contamination and how that would impact any reuse. But certainly, Mr. Peterman, Councilman Hugel, I'd like your input.
Yeah, I just want to say, I haven't told you this yet, but yesterday I met with Captain David Dees, who's the Chief of Staff at the Navy Region Mid-Atlantic, just to see if this was a dead issue over there or it was alive and well. And it was kind of funny because he had just talked to Captain Dasher earlier in the week about the same issue. And I heard the same things from Navy Region Mid-Atlantic as we heard, is that with the $4 billion, shipyard monies, they have to tear down buildings, rebuild buildings, and they may need this for, a landing site. And so we're scheduled for another meeting, in 3 weeks with the shipyard, to kind of, because they wanted some time to gather, their stuff together, because this kind of fell on, idle for the last 2 years, basically. But the good thing is it's alive and well at Navy Region Mid-Atlantic. The admiral there is having his change of command on the 4th of June. So it's, they're not going to do anything in between now and June, but they're waiting on the shipyard to tell them what the road ahead looks like. And one of the things we asked them is maybe if the whole, 16 acres is available, is some of it available? Because we had, previously had requests for the area on the far left of the slide, to be used by, the current occupant of that slip. And so there's lots of opportunity here. They did an environmental survey on this thing, which was almost a showstopper. There's a lot of pollution, mostly near the piers or in the water, and they're resurfacing the environmental survey to see what maybe there's other places that don't have pollution. So, and they may have to redo the portions of the environmental survey. The other thing that was interesting is the Wheelabator facility. I asked the question, since that's government property and the building, the same question we asked: what happens when they shut this thing down next year? Is they going to tear it down, or is it going to just be a piece of junk? And you were going to ask the city attorneys to look back onto the lease of that, see what's what. And they don't have an answer over at Region Mid-Atlantic either. So I asked that question specifically because otherwise we got a building that looks like a piece of crap. And it may just be abandoned when they close the Wheelgater facility. And it's one of the things we need to not have that. And the question on that is that land available as well as part of this Southgate project? And the answer is, well, we never even thought about that until now. So we question, so Ryan's and mine questioning of what's going to happen to that when they're done. There's no answer to it right now. They didn't even know it was a question. So that's all I had, Brian.
Councilman?
To be honest, I was pretty disappointed with the conversation, but having been shipyard commander once upon a time and knowing that the shipyard commander is one of the few people inside the fence line that's thinking more than 6 months down the road, I guess I wasn't particularly surprised that they hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about this since the whole thing kind of petered out before the pandemic, and maybe we'll get them thinking about it again. But with the uncertainty of their infrastructure optimization projects, and they're at this point being ultra conservative and hanging on to things that are kind of just in case things. I haven't said that. My prediction is they will never put anything over at Southgate during their infrastructure improvement because it's just too far out of the way. And maybe asking them the Wheelabrator question was a good thing, because as they're building out the details of their land projects on the shipyard waterfront, if I was them, I'd make sure that the Wheelabrator thing got knocked down, taken away, emptied out that space, and I'd be using that space as the swing space because it's right over there adjacent to the carrier end of the shipyard. But we'll plant those seeds with the outgoing and incoming shipyard commanders when I have a chance, and maybe encourage the new guy coming in at the end of June to think about it more than his base support guy obviously has been thinking about it. Was Bobby Dasher the guy that you worked with, Brian, before on all this stuff, or?
No, it was his predecessor, and I think that's, has been historically been the issue, is as we have changing command and leadership and staffing, that the progress that we make over a year to 2 year time span, it gets reset. And I don't know, we may have a recommendation to how we could prevent that in the future, but how do we not, drop the ball and succumb to changes from a staffing standpoint?
So Patrick, the civilian Patrick, whose last name is escaping me.
Giles. Yeah.
So, not an old guy, not getting ready to retire. If you've got a relationship, I'd say foster that relationship. The key to working on things that take a while is to create the relationship with the senior civilians in the yard. They are the kind of the corporate memory and the ones that see things through over the long haul. And so Captain Dasher will come and go, shipyard commanders will come and go, but and the senior civilians are the folks that it's important to have working relationships with. And so it was good that he was there, and we need to make sure that we keep inviting him back when we continue to have these discussions, keep his head in the game.
I think it's there now. I think there was a lack of awareness after his predecessor, Doug Taylor, retired. Doug was kind of the keeper of the history there, and what our discussions have been. So trying to get Patrick up to speed. I think he's quickly getting there, so we'll definitely keep working with him to make sure that it's on his list.
And just one other thing is, with the reorganization of the shipyard into two commands, I mean, that seems to be like their focus point right now.
Well, for what it's worth, those discussions were in progress when I was in command. Okay, so, all of that conversation about splitting the shipyard into a shipyard and a base and letting the base guy worry about the base stuff and the shipyard commander only worry about fixing ships on the base. That discussion's been ongoing at Norfolk Naval Shipyard since the mid 1990s. Now, for what it's worth, I think because Navy 4-star leadership is frustrated with the pace of getting ships out of shipyards, there's a lot more momentum built up now to finally do that. I personally think it's a bad idea. Personally fought it when I was in command, but I think they're pretty close to pulling the trigger. And maybe when that's in the rearview mirror, then we can get the base person to focus on the discussions that we want to have about land usage.
Okay. Moving forward, items submitted by commissioners. I have none at this time. Report backs. Anything?
Yes, Chair, just a few items. First and foremost, I would like to thank the commissioners who were in attendance at last Friday's State of the City event at the casino. I think it was a sold out crowd. It was the largest event yet held at Rivers. I think they did a fantastic job and really pulled it off. But I did want to say thank you to the commissioners who were in attendance for the event. The mayor shared a lot of the exciting things that are happening in Portsmouth right now, many of which you were involved in directly. So I wanted to thank you for your attendance. We also issued our annual report for 2022, the calendar year, and we each have a copy of that here today. We had a fantastic year. I'd like to thank you for your partnership and support in helping us achieve a lot of what we managed to achieve last year and years prior. But the thing that I'd like to stress to you is I think, have kind of set a benchmark for our performance here in Portsmouth from an economic development standpoint, working to achieve, $100 million plus annual investment numbers for, really the last 5 years. And I think that's our benchmarking goal going forward, that we should be hitting that mark every year, achieving over, $1.5 billion in new investment in the last 6 years in total. So I think we have a good game plan for that. Look forward to working with you all going forward. But certainly 2022 was a great year. I think this year is going to be equally as productive. So thank you for attending the State of the City last week. A couple follow-ups from your February meeting. We are going to be working on trying to coordinate a port tour. So with Chris and Mr. Cross, we've had some conversations about working to get the commissioners there for a tour for those who have not been able to see it yet. One thing we are considering is maybe that's a tour that's done from the waterfront and looking to have some sort of cruise where we can actually look at many of the different locations that Will shared with us this morning. So you get a different perspective of the maritime community here in Hampton Roads, specifically Portsmouth. So I think we're going to work to see how we can coordinate that. And obviously based on your availability and scheduling. I've been on a number of those, and they're really, really helpful to understand what is present here on Hampton Roads, things you just don't see from the waterfront or even from the landward side. So we'll work to coordinate that and provide some details very soon.
Thank you.
The other thing is, Dominion Energy. I've been in conversations with them. We would like to have them come before you and make a presentation on the Coastal Virginia offshore wind project, to expand on some of the conversations that we've had with Chris and Will this morning, to talk about not just the project, but how local businesses can participate in the supply chain, as well as talking about some of these workforce development needs that we have identified. And we're looking to do that in May at your May meeting. So tentatively, I have that on the agenda for May for discussion with some of their representatives. And staying on the theme of presentations and guest speakers, Nala is going to be reaching out to the Hampton Roads Workforce Council to get them into a upcoming meeting as well, to have a follow-up conversation on workforce development. Stay tuned. Those things will be coming up here in the next few months, and we'll work to advise you of when they will fall.
Frank, can I just ask a question on that? According to the newspaper, that's my source, that there was only 70% of the footprint that they needed for, this wind energy thing. Is that still a true number? 70%, they're still looking for initial 30% footprint?
Footprint in terms of
laydown areas.
Laydown construction. I think the industry overall is looking for additional waterfront property. My understanding is based on what's present at Portsmouth Marine Terminal and the Fairwinds landing site from the CVAL project. I believe they have identified the land area needed for the construction of the project and then operations. But certainly Chris and Will are well versed in what's happening beyond Portsmouth. If there's something you all are aware of.
I would just say that there's definitely a deficit along the US East Coast when it comes to industrial sites suitable for the laydown, storage, and marshaling of offshore wind components. That's an identified challenge that exists. So, by all means, I think PMT will be very busy, as will Fairwinds Landing. But subsequently, I think some of these ancillary industrial waterfront sites that are here in the city of Portsmouth, I don't know what, you have the facility Fairleads has right here. What can they do? You have so many of these great waterfront users that are run by terrific people who are business minded. And I think there will be significant opportunities for, sometimes might be short term, but it's always those short term that become long term pieces of business. So I think that's why there's some real excitement here, because when you start surveying the entire US East Coast and what that industrial waterfront landscape looks like, it's scarce, and what's out there is really not viable. And then even what might be viable, there's no one to actually work at the site because it's in an area that isn't very densely, concentrated with a maritime ecosystem like we have in Virginia. So I think Dominion is going to have a lot of activity, but it's really not just Dominion. It's the entire, right now there's over 20 projects on the horizon, which is, decades worth of construction work of these offshore wind farms being installed in the Atlantic Ocean off the East Coast. So, I think once you start seeing the product flowing into the market, which we'll see this year, and these projects begin to get fully permitted, there's going to be some scrambling to find properties to stow and, fabricate and do some work on some of these first few projects, because the supply chain obviously is still European based, and that's what our efforts are here. It's not just the transactional project work, but it's really trying to find these opportunities for the supply chain to locate here in Hampton Roads. And that's where some of these opportunities really lie. So there's a lot more to come.
Brian, if I may add, and I think the other thing too is everybody wants to chase like the big white whale opportunities, right? They want to land some sort of like massive construction laydown yard or something like that. And to Chris's point, essentially those projects have already landed where they're going to land. Where there's still a lot more opportunity, those are secondary, tertiary operations that people don't think about as much, that don't require, hundreds of acres, right? And I think, I'll give you an example. So these wind projects are all being serviced by offshore support vessels and these small vessels going in and out. Well, they need a place to tie up. They need a place to come take on stores, have operations, et cetera. So that's just one example of other use for smaller parcels on the waterfront. And that's why I kind of liken what Chesapeake is doing right now as an example of how they're doing this industrial waterfront facility themselves to really figure out what they have available, how is it being utilized, and what's the best use of these industrial parcels. So maybe there could be an idea for the city of Portsmouth to do something somewhat similar of some sort of study. What do we have as far as, quayside access and then parcels of land that are immediately inland that could be repurposed for lots of different things, not just offshore land.
I'll just make one final comment to Will's point. I mean, I think this commission and their last year Port Post locality grant was shipwright. I mean, again, not speaking for a private business, but obviously I think offshore wind would be part of what, that grant will help fund the enhancements and improvements to their water side of the operation there on shipwright. So, I mean, I think you guys are in a really neat position and have been involved up to date, on funding where appropriate or providing grants to some Portsmouth businesses to win these opportunities coming along, no pun intended, with offshore wind.
And you're exactly right, Chris, and this year's award as well to
Sure.
Crofton.
Crofton,
So that they can, replace their bulkhead, which is what International Flooring and Protective Coatings is doing on shipwright. They've been in conversations with companies in the offshore wind industry, and Chris and Will's point, the construction and manufacturing is obviously something that we're focused on immediately, but these wind farms have a 20-year lifespan, so the operations, maintenance, servicing side of it is kind of the long play, because that's a ton of jobs getting created there, and we have the ability to have them locate here in Portsmouth. So if it's a servicing vessel, survey team that needs to set up operations, we have the ability to accommodate them on a smaller scale at some of our waterfront properties. So we're working to do that, and they've been in some conversations, and we've been included in them with some of those operators in the industry. So there's a lot more to come. I think it's still developing. The industry will be built out, but we're definitely focused on that. So whether it's the shipwright property or Crofton's property, Fairleigh, General Dynamics, these key waterfront sites, as they have the ability to kind of flex with the needs of the industry, they will do that.
I guess, I'm not sure how the joint land use studies between the government and the Suffolk and Portsmouth and whatever, is everybody, are we totally aware of what they're recommending for Craney Island and all the other base use things? And I was just wondering if they might be somebody that you want to bring them in to read this as well.
Specifically on the joint land use,
Yeah.
well, I actually will be attending a meeting tomorrow for an update on that. The plan is still being developed, and that is through the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. So can certainly provide you an update and briefing. And when they have something that they can share publicly, then we'll look to see about getting them before you.
Okay, perfect.
Any further discussions? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Have a great day, everybody.